Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the Wolf-Full riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. Welcome to Wolf Fights. Forget the UFC, forget the WWE, forget Tyson versus Paul. The hottest fight is the battle of the biologists. In one, the blue corner, we have the Professor Bridget Von Holt from Princeton University. In the red corner, we have Professor Linda Rutledge from Trent University. In 2016, Von Holt and colleagues published a major study into the genetics of North America's wolves. Their evidence showed the so-called eastern wolf, also known as the Algonquin wolf, and the red wolf were actually recent hybrids that only came about because European settlers extirpated gray wolves from eastern North America. This resulted in the western coyote moving into the now wolf-free zones of the east, where they mated with the gray wolves. The resulting hybrids were not sterile, in fact, quite the opposite. The wolf-coyote hybrids, which lived closer to the gray wolf territory, began to mix with those wolves, and the wolf coyotes, which lived closer to the coyote territory, did the same with coyotes. The result was that we have coyote-like red wolves in the southeastern United States and the wolf-like eastern wolves in eastern Canada. In response to that paper's conclusion, Linda Rutledge and her colleagues wrote a scathing response paper stating that Von Holt's team was wrong and concluded that, quote, their analysis does not actually test the hypothesis of a recent hybrid origin, end quote. Among scientists, claiming your opponent didn't actually test the hypothesis is a declaration of war. Seeing a hot fight in the making, the Science Journal editors made sure their next issue also included a response to the response. Von Holt and colleagues responded with a quick flurry of facts, followed by the withering tone people take when they have to explain something to someone who should be smart enough to already get it. Von Holt's final response was effectively a knockout punch. Rutledge and her colleagues basically conceded defeat, kind of. 1 year later, both professors joined together with their respective teams and co-wrote a paper. Rather than actually admitting there are just two original North American canid species, gray wolves and coyotes, Rutledge and Von Holt basically agreed that because Ontario and the Great Lakes are a canine soup of wolves, coyotes and coyote-wolf hybrids mixing with the wolf-coyote hybrids, the evolutionary history is obscured. It's like, rather than admitting you were wrong, you admit that you can't prove that you're right. But the reason you've been listening to me talk about wolf scientists, and the reason these two teams of scientists went at each other for years, is in the title of the co-authored paper. It's called, quote, Population Genomic Analysis of North American Eastern Wolves, Canis lichen, supports their conservation priority status, end quote. You see, the reason these two groups were fighting so hard is because this was never about science. The media, both news media and entertainment media, have tried to paint a picture of this scientist as an independent-minded person who's only interested in the pursuit of knowledge. The reality is that these groups were trying to influence public policy. We can see that by going back to the very first paper by Von Holt and her team that claimed to prove there were only two North American canids, gray wolves and coyotes. They state in their paper that the so-called eastern wolf was accepted as a distinct species, then the U.S. government would delist the gray wolf as an endangered species in northeastern United States. The problem for Rutledge and her team was that if the eastern wolf is not a separate species, but just a hybrid resulting from European colonization, then it becomes harder to support protecting it in Canada. Neither group of scientists were trying to find the truth. They had a goal already in mind, the conservation of wolves, and they set out to find evidence to support their goal. That's not science. That's the opposite of science. The final paper the two groups wrote together attempts to reconcile the dispute by arguing that these hybrids could act as reserves of genetic diversity for the originating species. Except, as the authors admit, this has to be achieved by actively managing the population so that they don't end up crossbreeding with more than one of their parental species than the other. So now, as part of the management plan to conserve a 400-year-old man-made hybrid species, we need to spend tax dollars monitoring how much they're mating with coyotes and wolves. And if that gets out of balance, we have to spend even more tax dollars to resolve the balance.
Perfectly balanced, this whole thing should be.
And their conservation plan starts to make them sound like a Marvel supervillain. We can start to see where their good intentions will take us. What they can't resolve is the inherent contradiction in trying to preserve this Algonquin wolf coyote or eastern wolf. As the author's own research has shown, this entire side of the continent once belonged to the gray wolf. Humans killed so many in the last 400 years, their territory has shrunk to the northern boreal forest. That vacuum was taken up by less threatening coyotes and smaller hybrids. So now, these scientists want us to protect the land for the colonial hybrids and deny the original inhabitants from returning to their traditional territory. But their activism paid off. Last week, the Environment Minister designated the Algonquin wolf coyote under the Species at Risk Act. The government took this action despite the risk it presents to the government's bottom line. For the last decade, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories and Atomic Energy of Canada have been trying to get a disposal facility built for all the low-level waste generated at Chalk River. Now, if one of the nearby wolf packs decides to relocate its den onto the planned site, the last decade of work and $160 million will be gone. While the government claims this new order will only impact federal lands, they also admit that under the Species at Risk Act, if any piece of land becomes designated as vital to maintain the species, the Environment Minister can issue an order effectively seizing control of your property. Our self-proclaimed socialist Environment Minister cannot be trusted with that kind of power. According to the Liberals' plans for renewable electricity, Ontario needs to find an area 400 times bigger than Toronto to build all those industrial wind turbines. The Socialist Coalition wants your property, and they will invent a fake species to get it. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant.